All right, we have Bob Hilland from the FBI, John Edwards, the psychic, making an unlikely duo. This reminds me of something from like the X-Files or something like that. We're taking real life law enforcement and combining it with John's psychic touch to solve a pretty serious murder case. You guys did a great book about it, which we'll talk about as well. But I guess just to start off, how did you guys pair up to create like this dynamic duo of crime solving?
So I was working in the New York office of the FBI. This is around 1998. I was assigned to a squad. We investigated unsolved murders, specifically like mob cases, organized crime type of things. And I had heard John on the radio. There was a very popular radio station where he would come on and claim that if he spoke to you, he could connect to your past loved ones. And I thought it was a bunch of nonsense. And it actually kind of bothered me a bit. And when I heard him come on the radio, I'd shut it off. And then a week or two later, I'd hear him again. And again, I would shut the radio off. And after hearing him repeatedly, I decided to call his office and make an appointment. And I brought to him a case that I had been working at the time involving a guy who was married to a couple of women who had disappeared. There were no witnesses, leads, or suspects in the case. And his assistant told me kind of quickly, hey, would you be available tomorrow? And I didn't even expect that this guy was going to meet with me. So I went to see him and just to kind of prove to myself that this guy was not legitimate, I brought with me items that did not belong to the case. So I was asked to bring belongings that belonged to the woman I was looking for. So that day I went around the office and got objects that belonged to other women, and I put them in the bag with items that belonged to the victim. And I met John, and right from the beginning, he kind of distinguished the items and he shed light on the case, things that were impossible for him to have known. And then also inadvertently told me things about myself that I didn't know, about my family. So that's how I met him.
John, is this something that you had done before, helping law enforcement with cases?
Not in the extent that I worked with Bob. I had experiences where in my readings, circumstances were revealed in the readings where the families either could confirm or the families would say, no, that's not true. And in one instance, a mom who had lost a child in a robbery went immediately and told the detectives on the case the information that came through. And long story short, the next day they were on the phone with me saying that only somebody at the crime scene would know the information that I revealed, because that was not revealed to the family or the media because it was an active case. So I had a couple of moments like that, sporadic over my career. Nothing quite like Bob. Bob was like a tsunami of opportunity to kind of use my abilities in a different capacity.
It's interesting to me, and you'll even understand this. Both of you guys are a little bit used to Bob more specifically. I had a psychic on earlier this year named Chris Medina, who did the same thing. I'm always open to listening to people with their various powers and some of them claims, etc. He came in and blew my mind when he did a psychic reading of me and told me stuff about myself that no one else knew. So I walked out, not that I wasn't a believer, but I walked out, okay, this guy has a special touch and a special power. Is this something that the FBI does regularly, use psychics? Had you heard of other examples of agents working with psychics?
Not at all.
Really?
For 30 years, I kept my relationship with John hidden. I hid it from my colleagues from the FBI.
Oh, wow.
So, and that proved to be difficult at times, because there were certain cases where I was with my colleagues working a particular case and John led me to a body. And my buddies would say, how did you know to look there? How did you know, who was that you were talking to? So it was quite a quandary. The FBI, we don't talk to psychics for good reason. We deal in facts. But I could not deny that the things that John told me over those years, they were incredibly valuable. They were proved to be true.
It's interesting. I just read a Stephen King short story called Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, where he has a dream where this body is buried. He goes there and finds out. And when he tells the police, because there's no way he could have known, the police thought that he was guilty of this. Is that something that you've ever had an issue with, Bob? If you know all of these
100%.
facts?
100%.
Yeah.
There was a particular case where a woman was killed at Yale University. I was with my colleagues, and I'm on the phone with John, and he's telling me to go down this hallway and look in this particular room, and her body was found there. So now my buddies are going, hold on.
Yeah.
How did you know to look there, right? So then in those circumstances, I had to kind of let those people in on, hey, this is what was going on, you know?
So, John, this was the first time you'd ever worked in this sort of an area of helping out the FBI, the police. Is it something that was natural for you to do, or were you a little bit apprehensive of getting involved in an official capacity?
I was very apprehensive. My dad was a New York City police officer and a career military guy whose exact words to me were, don't ever say you worked with the police. Make sure you have a complete respect for the uniform. And I was like, yeah, I have no interest in doing that. So he wasn't a big fan of the subject matter when he was alive. And never knew, I never revealed to him that I was working with Bob. I never actually went to him, to validate, like, seeking approval, from him. But I really never had that as an interest. It wasn't where my interest lied. I wanted to, my interest didn't lie with working with celebrities either, right? So in the same token, like, my focus has always been like my clients, my everyday clients, the people that I feel like I can make a difference in their lives. And not that I don't feel like I can make a difference in a celebrity's life, and not that I don't feel like I can make a difference, working with like somebody like Bob. It had just never been something that was of interest to me. So when the opportunity was presented, and it's funny because we just had some type of reveal in having these interviews and conversations. I thought that Bob had called my office like a number of times because my assistant kept saying, we got to get this guy in. We got to get this guy in. So to her credit, she was the person who actually made this happen, because I didn't initially jump on the, like, yeah, let's get him in, because to me it's no different than a celebrity calling my office and saying that they're a celebrity and that they want an appointment. It's like, no, I have a number of people that I'm supposed to be working with. Why should this person jump the line? So that was kind of the place that it came. Like, it has that was like a cousin vibe of the same energy. And then when I met Bob, it shifted. And one of the reasons why it shifted is that I saw a difference in how information came through when I was talking to him. So that piqued my interest. And I was like, this is different. So then I thought, this is a challenge. And it was a challenge for me to kind of stretch and do something different. And by the way, that's who I am as a person. I like to stretch. I like to challenge myself. I travel internationally to do this in different parts of the world. That's a challenge because you encounter different cultures and, different just names and how things come across. So working with Bob was just like kind of going to a foreign land.
Bob, you mentioned that John told you some things that no one could have known,
Yep.
and that's how you were very impressed. And how long did it take for you to really trust him with these very very specific clues and things like that you're discussing with him?
That's a great question. So I don't think it was an overnight thing. I think our relationship evolved over time. I think that on that first meeting, the information he provided about that particular case was so specific and singular in nature. It wasn't these ambiguous things. They were very specific. Like, the victim has a metal pin in her hip. He described a box with a body in it that was dismembered. And the things he said were impossible for him to have known. But then during that call, I had put him on the phone with the victim's daughter. And he started getting information about this person. And the woman on the phone says, yeah, I don't know who you're talking about. And all of a sudden, it turned towards me. And he started telling me things about my family, some of which I had no idea. Some of it was very, very specific. And so I wrestled with that. And I remember that day he said, hey, I know you came for help on this case, but this stuff that came through for your family, you're now the messenger. You have to provide this to your parents. My dad's an old school guy from Brooklyn, right? He's like Archie Bunker. So the day came and I called him, and he verified things, as did my mother, that I didn't know, like family secrets. So how could John know these things if I didn't know them? So, and for me, I deal in a world of logic and evidence. what he did could not be denied, but it didn't make sense to me. So that curiosity kept driving me back to him to ask more questions. And I think through that process, we bonded. We formed a friendship.
Let's talk about the book about chasing evil, dealing with the John Smith case. And there's so much more to ask, but I want to talk to you about this case for sure. Let's kind of go through the case. I mean, it's fairly famous, and this is the one that you guys worked together to solve this. But when you came across it, Bob, it was pretty much a cold case for decades, correct?
Yeah, that's true. I was actually a cop in Jersey when Smith came in and reported one of his wives missing. So I knew it because I was a cop there. And then just to fast forward the story, the case was cold and there was no bodies were recovered, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. This guy had a wife in Jersey who disappeared in 1991. The circumstances certainly suggested something nefarious happened to her. As the cops and investigators were looking into him, they found out, guess what? He had another wife many years earlier who disappeared the same way. They ran every lead to the ground. There were no witnesses, leads, or suspects, and the case was dead in the water. So I picked it up many years later, going through reports from the 70s on this guy. And the cops did a good job. They really left no stone unturned. So now I've got to try to revisit this thing in the late 90s, seeing what I can't break loose in it. And while I'm also working many other cases for the FBI, other matters, and I would hear John, and I thought he was a con. This guy's silly. Nobody's believing this. And so I said, I got a case. If he's so good, he'll help me with this case. That's how I went to him. But ultimately, the information he provided me that day, he identified, hey, whose name is Michael? Well, Michael was the bad guy's brother. He says, well, Michael knows everything. And he was right. And John also identified, hey, I don't understand why you're talking to me. You've got this body. It's on the side of a road in a wooden box. And I had no idea what he was talking about. Well, years later, we found that box. It was another one of his victims. So the information John provided helped tie this together for us.
It's incredible. John, before we talk about some of the specifics that Bob just mentioned, when did you start to realize that you had some special powers in the psychic world?
Well, I think as a kid growing up in the 70s, I always thought I had special powers, but that was my imagination, right? I wanted to be bionic in the worst way.
Of course.
Superheroes, right? All of that. But then at the age of 15, I had a reading and I went to debunk somebody that was doing psychic readings at my grandmother's house. And I had adopted my dad's philosophy that this was not something that was real or legitimate. It was something that the ladies do, coffee, cake, and a psychic on a Sunday. And this woman changed my life. She blew my mind. She came out with information that I would have had to have given her. She would have had to have been with me. Like there's nobody that was in the house that day could have given her the information that she gave me. And then she gave me outcomes. So that put me on my path of discovery. I say this openly. I didn't love the reading because I felt violated. I felt like this woman walked around my life and knew stuff, and I didn't like it. It was like kind of coming home and finding people in your house.
Right.
So I didn't like that vibe. I wanted to learn more about it. And it wasn't because she told me I could do this. It was more like I wanted to know how I could stop anybody else from doing this. Like, is there like a psychic alarm system that you can put in? And that just sent me on this path of discovery of I became insatiable with information. I read everything I can get my hands on. And what I discovered is that what I thought was normal and natural was actually psychic. So I was able to go back and reframe moments from my youth and say like, well, that's normal. Like we all do that. Like everybody sees their dead relatives at some point, right? Doesn't everybody see their dead grandfather? And then friends in high school be like, no, that's not normal. So I had a reframing of my past. And then I actively decided, well, let me see if I could push this. Like, what can I do with this? So I studied tarot and a little bit of astrology and numerology and psychometry. And that was it. It was like I was off running and just always trying to push the envelope to validate for myself that this was real with every reading that I did.
Is there some sort of a chemistry that comes for you, John, like when Bob approaches you and starts giving you some of these tips and pointers? Are you kind of like, I don't know if muse is the right word or conduit is the right word, but did you find a sort of a chemistry maybe with Bob, which enabled you to kind of figure out some of these things, or could you do this with anybody?
I don't think I could do this with anybody because I let me just answer the first part of it.
Okay.
I think Bob and I created a chemistry.
Mm.
I think we found a rhythm in how things work pretty quickly. And I've said this in a previous interview. If you come to me for a reading and you ask me a question and I give you insights from my team, my guides, right? And they tell you what the answer is. And they say, here's the answer, it's blue. And you then try to ask me that same question 5 minutes later, but slightly different. They won't answer that. They're gonna say, we gave you the answer. The answer is blue. Let's move on to something else. That's what I was used to. Like probably 15 years or so, I was already used to that kind of process. Then enter Bob into the equation. Bob would ask me a question. I would give him the information. Bob would slightly alter the question, but it was the same question. And I would be ready to say, no, we've already addressed that. And when I would go to say, we've already addressed that, more information came through. That got my attention because that was different. I'd be like, wait, whoa, what's going on here? Like, what is happening?
Right.
Why are they answering this man? Like, who is this guy that all of a sudden, like, this is different? It's different with him. And it was different with him. And Bob, how many times would you ask me something like one specific thing? It was like, you would just like, kind of like, it's almost like turning the camera to get different perspectives around the same circle. And they would do it. They would give me information. So I learned to trust Bob and them. And I would kind of get out of the way of it. So much so that when I was in California on tour and they had the mudslides, there was a police officer who stood up in front of an entire room full of people and said, will you help me try to find some of the victims that are missing? And even if I wanted to say no, I couldn't in that moment. It was like, yes, I will. And when I met her after the event, I was very honest with her. I said, listen, I mean no disrespect. I go, but I know that they're going to work with this guy. Would you mind talking to him? And I had the police officer call Bob. And on that case, it was the only time I think I ever brought Bob a case, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So, Bob, what were some of the first things that you asked John regarding the John Smith case?
Well, how it went was I called his office one time, and his assistant took my information. She was skeptical that I was even an FBI agent, and then she confirmed who I was, and she said, let me talk to him. I don't know if he wants to work with you. And then a week later, she said, please come. And the only thing John was asking me to bring were items that belonged to that victim in that case. So I said, okay. And as I told you, I had brought with me belongings from some of the ladies I worked with in my office as control items. But specifically, as I said, we started by putting these objects in front of him on a table. And there were a total of 9 items, 4 of which had nothing to do with the case. And he took these 4 items and he kind of pushed them aside. And he says, yeah, this really has nothing to do with the reason you're here. And he picked up a pair of eyeglasses that belonged to our victim. He called her by her name. He said she has 2 names, but she goes by her middle name. He described her physically, described how many children she had, and said the person that caused her death is either a boyfriend or husband. And I'm pretty sure he has a J name like John. And that was exactly right. And then from there, it was just like an avalanche of information. It just came nonstop. And the things were not ambiguous. They were specific. When he said, whose name is Michael? Michael's his brother. Michael knows everything. And it was just thing after thing after thing. And it was like, check, 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 check. And then as I heard him on the radio, he claimed that if he spoke to you, he could connect to your past loved one. So I put him on the phone with the victim's daughter. And then all of a sudden, this bizarre thing happened where he started strangely connecting to my family, and telling me things that I didn't even know, which I was like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. And it turned out to be true. But then from there, like I told you, I needed to understand how he could do this because it was impossible. Things were too specific. So I would come back with more questions for him. And then at some point while working that case, he would start coming through with something and I would be completely confused, but it was on a different case. And he started picking up on things on a different case I was working. And that all of a sudden sent our relationship in a different path for cases.
John, pick that up where Bob was talking. So Bob approaches you, and what are you seeing to help you know that Michael knows everything and that his name begins with a J?
It's just how it's no different than when I'm doing a regular reading for anybody. It's like I'm clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient, which means that I see, hear, and feel energy, and then I have to interpret it in my frame of reference. So a lot of the information I'm just like hearing, and it's not an out loud hearing. It's more of like a thought that's kind of like dropped. So I pay attention to what I'm actually thinking. What made me smile just now is that I remember where I was. I was just getting ready to walk into a gym, and Bob asked me a question about a case. And as he always would, he provided zero information. It was like, as little as possible. And then I'm like rattling off all this information because I was getting a lot of it. And I remember him going, yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about because that has nothing to do with the case. And then there was like a beat or two. And then he said, wait a minute. They're actually giving you information on a case I didn't even ask you about. Wait, that could happen? I was like, apparently so.
When did you finally come up with the name John Smith? And once again, John Smith, fairly common name. How were you able to track down this guy to finally make an arrest on him?
Yeah, great question. So again, this is pre 9/11. Things were a lot different back then in the way of the speed at which we could do things back then. So,
How do you mean? How are things a lot different?
Oh, well, today we have technology. If you gave me his name and information, I could get it in 5 minutes, right?
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Back in the day, it was manual paper searches and trying to track the guy in other ways. So, but the bottom line was, at the time I picked up the case, this guy had vanished. He was off the radar. We knew he was last in Ohio. Nobody really knew where he was. And, anytime we work a case, at least initially, we want to be covert about it. We don't want people knowing that we're looking at them for obvious reasons. So we certainly didn't want to step to people at that stage. But ultimately, I identified a woman, a former acquaintance of his, who reluctantly cooperated and then told me that he had relocated once again, remarried, reinvented his life out in California. Now we had a bigger concern that now this guy who's known to be married to women who disappear, now we have a concern that he's married yet again. Is this woman in danger also?
I guess, how did you focus on this John Smith? Like, what did you give him, John? I mean, was there a facial picture? Was there an address? I mean, John Smith, which John Smith do you even go for?
So for me, when I'm getting information, like I like to be very, very clear. I say, I did not work for the FBI. I worked for a different 3-letter organization called the BOB. That would be this gentleman. And I didn't solve anything. In the same way that if I have a client that comes to me and that client is grieving over the loss of their dad, I could provide them insights and information and communication from their dad. What they do with that is really up to them. So all the information that I gave to Bob, he was able to utilize on the case that he was working. And sometimes I had no idea if I was being helpful or if I wasn't being helpful, because he wanted to keep my biases at a minimum. So he wanted to make sure that he could come back to the well. So jokingly, I feel like, by today's standards, I was kind of like AI back there. Back then, he discovered, oh, this is like a psychic tool that I could actually utilize. Let me see how I could utilize this. And can I get more information out of him? So a lot of times I didn't even know if it was being helpful.
What was the piece of information, Bob, that made you confirm it was this John Smith that's in California?
Well, the case facts already identified him, right? He's the guy that said, he walked into a police department and said, hey, my wife just disappeared. He was already a subject. And then he had another wife in 1974 who disappeared. So he was already on the radar. It wasn't like we didn't know who the guy was. So, but John didn't know that. John didn't know. He didn't know who the victims were. He didn't know the case. He knew nothing about this.
When you said earlier that the cops did a great job, they left no stone unturned. Yeah. Is it because you don't have a body that you can't connect John Smith to the disappearance of his wife? Is that the piece of evidence that you need to take it to the next level?
Yeah. I mean, certainly there have been cases that have been prosecuted without a body, but it's very, very difficult. The circumstantial evidence before I got it was very clear that, but we say in law enforcement, knowing something and proving it are two different things. So I think it's very fair to say, hey, we, the law enforcement, knew he was responsible for these, the disappearance of these women. They knew that he had a propensity to solicit prostitutes. They knew all kinds of stuff about them, but proving it to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt is a different standard, right? So he was already on the radar. But when I went to John didn't know anything about this case, right?
Mhm.
And you'll see this book is about many cases. There's a lot of very high profile cases that John helped out on in this book.
And I guess it's also one of the reasons why you're hesitant to tell your fellow agents about this, because he's giving you tips and you're taking it and basically turning it into evidence. But on the surface, it's kind of like, well, how do you prove any of this? Well, you have to prove it, what he's saying, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the best analogy I can give you, remember the days before we had GPS giving us directions, and you ask somebody on the street, hey, how do I get to this place? And they say, go down this road, look for the big red barn and turn left, go down that road.
Mhm.
John was the guy giving me these clues. John didn't give me evidence, but he kind of gave me directions. Hey, look for this. Or if you're in this particular case, look for a soccer ball, or look for this. They were kind of indicators for me, and it was kind of like highlighting things for me, you know. Or like there were cases where in the book where I polygraphed Michael Vick, the football player, right? And it's in the book, and John would say things to me that were going to happen in the interview. I'm like, yeah, it's not going to go down like that. That's not how these things work. And he'd say, no, it's going to happen like this. And sure enough, what he said, during the interview, when this happens, do this. And it was true.
Was that the Michael Vick and the dogs, or what was
Yes.
that case? Wow. So you were involved with that one too.
Yeah.
Just going back to what you said earlier, Bob, about cold cases.
Yeah.
And once again, as a citizen, is there a library of cold cases and you just pull one out, look through, or what attracted you to this particular case?
That's a great question. There is always a library. Imagine like New York City. Imagine the thousands of unsolved murders they have in New York City dating back decades, right? But to your question, remember, I started out as a cop in this department in Jersey where Smith had reported his wife missing. So I was aware of this case when I was a young cop. I left the department and joined the FBI in 1997. And then, within a year, I got pulled back to my old department to testify in some old cases. And I ran to the detective. We were sitting having coffee, and I saw on the shelf the binders about this case. And I just asked him, hey, whatever happened with that case? He said it was dead in the water. So to your question, my interest was because I was aware of it. I worked there. I knew the case. It's as simple as that.
John, when you have visions with this information, how does it appear to you? Is it like a dream? Is it very lucid? Like how are you seeing it?
Kind of like a daydream. It's like if you are like kind of like drifting off in the middle of a conversation, or you're distracted in school and you have this whole other thing that's taking place. That's what it feels like. It feels like I'm focusing on my daydream. I'm inside that moment. And then I want to make sure that I'm capturing as much of the detail of what I'm seeing, hearing, and feeling. And then again, what does it mean to me? And then translating that back to Bob. It's like an energetic form of sign language.
What's the most haunting vision that you had from the Smith case, for example, that really, or maybe the biggest piece of evidence that you're able to pass on to Bob?
So the one that stands out, and I've said this forever, is I found it interesting that they told me that she had breast implants, and that it would be very important that Bob needed to know the serial number of her breast implants. And although I have a healthcare background, I did not know that breast implants had a serial number on them.
Right.
So when he validated the fact that she indeed did have breast implants, and that she, that he would have the serial number, that to me was an indicator that at some point in the future, he would be able to identify her, or she would be identified by those serial numbers, by the breast implants. That stands out for me.
I mean, there's no other way to, I mean, that's proof positive right there. If you find these breast implants, Bob, when you finally arrest John Smith, talk about him just as a suspect. And I know you had to interrogate him, and what was that like for you when you finally were able to get hands on this guy?
Yeah, so May 5th of 1999, there was this big plan that was put in place, and it just went like this. From a lot of investigative work, we knew where he worked in Escondido, California. I rolled up on him with another agent, and we brought him to a hotel room to sit and talk to him. What was significant about that was all the previous investigations, the way it went was they would bring him in, interrogating him for hours. He wouldn't say much. But then after he was done, he would go warn all his friends and family, hey, the cops are going to come talk to you. Don't say anything. So we decided to flip it. So the moment I rolled up on John and brought him to this hotel, we had identified all his family and friends through the years that may have a piece of this thing. And all around the United States in the same date and same time, FBI agents and cops grabbed everybody, brought them to different locations, and at the same time interviewed them. And that the results of those interviews were fed to me in the hotel room. So to your question, what was he like? He was not like I thought he was going to be. He's a rather meek, mild guy. He's somewhat effeminate, but he's got an incredible coldness to him, right? He's very, very evasive. He's incredibly smart. It's like playing poker with a guy, right? It's a guy who's a good poker player, but he comes off as this innocent, poor me guy. This is all a big misunderstanding. But there were times in my interview with him that day, and certainly other times, when he would slip up and you would see the real personality come out. And that was like a Jekyll and Hyde moment. When you saw the real John Smith, you could see the change in his demeanor, his body language, even how he spoke.
Didn't he have some sort of a quirk as well when he was caught in a lie or something along those lines?
Yeah. So he would make a high-pitched noise. And the previous detectives would say, hey, when you get him caught up in a lie, he's going to make this sound like a baby crying or like somebody stepping on a cat, and they would make this noise. And I'd say, come on, you're exaggerating. And then the independent guys would tell me this thing. And sure enough, when I'm in the hotel in California and I'm closing in on him, all of a sudden he starts making these weird, bizarre noises,
Creepy, right?
Yeah.
John, do you ever feel a danger at all when you experience these visions and you feel any type of being scared at all?
From what though? From the,
I mean, just from the visions from the people that you're dealing with. I mean, no.
I have no negative experiences. Nothing that's made me unnerved from doing psychic work. I do believe in negative energy, but I believe that negative energy is here in the physical world. I believe more in the evil in man than I do in the spirit.
So you're saying the spirits are all coming to you with the best of intentions?
Absolutely. I've never had somebody come through in a negative capacity.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's all to help the people that are here evolve through their grief and let them know that there's a survival of consciousness and that life and love are eternal.
What did you know about Michael? You said that the brother knows everything and he'll tell you. How did that come to you?
Well, as Bob is doing Bob, right? He's probing and he's asking like questions that may be, what breaks this case? What should I be looking for? What can help me with this? Or I'm paraphrasing some of the, basics that he might ask me. And then that's when information. So he would prompt me and then like I would get information. So it was like he would ask the questions and then it was like I was filling in the blanks for that. Or I should say they were filling in the blanks for that.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier, Bob, about the remains in the wooden box that was on the side of the highway. Tell us a little bit about that. So this is where he placed the body of his second wife.
That was his first wife.
His first wife. Okay.
Yeah. So in 1974, he killed her. He put her in a box. He cut her legs off.
Jeez.
And he kept this box in his family's garage for 5 years until one day it was found by other family members. He retrieved it and he drove it back to Indiana. And he threw it down a hill on the side of a road. And the following year, the county road crew was fixing the road up and they find this box with the remains in it. But it had been buried as a Jane Doe. Nobody knew who it was. This was 1980 was when it was found, before the days of the DNA databases. So she was a Jane Doe. So through a lot of investigative work, we were able to put that together. We went to the cemetery, dug her up, confirmed with DNA, and now we knew, because that aligned with what Michael told us. Michael told us about this box and the details of it.
So the family knew about it, but never called the police?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So they're obviously implicated in this as well then.
Yeah, but I will say this, but for Michael having the courage all these years later to come forward, this case would not have happened. So
Gotcha.
You're right in what you said, and it's hard to believe that family would cover something like this up, but it happened. But if Michael had not come forward and found the courage to do it, we wouldn't be talking about this case.
Right. Did you help with both? Because John Smith murdered two of his wives, and I don't know, there could be more. You guys can tell me that. But were you helping with both the wives, John, or was there just one specific wife that you were working on that led to the second one?
It was the second wife that led to the first one.
So were you able to connect the two?
I didn't make connections with Janice. It was more about details that emerged from the case about her.
So how were you able to link the two then, Bob?
So the case facts, before I even picked the case up, it was obvious this guy had killed both of his wives, right?
Okay.
So when I went to meet with John, I was not that I was disregarding the case from 1974, but it seemed more realistic that I would find the more recent victim. Her name was Fran. But as John described, he came through a lot of information on Fran. To this day, we've never found Fran, and it's not from a lack of trying. I've dug up dead dogs, dead cats. I've probably dug I don't know how many holes in New Jersey and in Ohio and other places looking for her, and never found her.
So when John Smith was indicted, it was just for Janice, and Fran is still kind of an open case then, even though you know what happened?
Yeah, so great question. So John was indicted and convicted for the first one, and then right before COVID hit, he was indicted for Fran's case. And then ultimately, he cut a deal, and he described what he did with Fran, but he just claimed that he threw her in a dumpster, which I don't necessarily believe. I think she's still around, and one day, if she's meant to be found, she'll pop up. But we don't know where she is.
Last question about the John Smith case. What made you finally decide, or maybe it was after the John Smith case, Bob, when did you finally reveal to your fellow agents and to the FBI that you were working together with John?
Yeah, again, great question. I think for the most part, nobody knew, with the exception of those instances and other cases where, like, imagine if you're with me at a particular scene and John is leading me to a location and we find a body, and you're going to say to me, "Hey, Bob, how did you know to look there?" So in those unique circumstances, I had to disclose to my colleagues, my buddies, "Hey, you're going to think I'm," and I was afraid. I was afraid,
Sure.
for my professional reputation, and I am the guy that people would say, Bob Hilland does not talk to psychics, not Bob. There's no way, right? So, but from my own experiences with John, if one of my colleagues came to me and said, "Hey, Bob, I'm talking to psychics," I'd say, "What are you, crazy? What are you talking about?"
Right.
So there was like, I was personally and professionally afraid, but also, the FBI doesn't work with psychics, but I could not deny the value that John brought to my cases. It was undeniable. So, God forbid a loved one of yours was missing and you came to me for help and I had no other investigative leads. Would you not want me to talk to John? Of course you would.
Sure.
So, I mean, I would be foolish not to go to John, who had proven himself repeatedly on this case and other cases. So, but the FBI knows now, because with this book, the FBI had to read it and prove it. So the cat's out of the bag, so to speak.
But that's pretty amazing, though. Now that could be a viable way to get the assist that you need to solve cases.
I think it would have to be on a case-by-case basis, because not every single person's going to work in the same way that Bob and I work together.
Right.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I think a unique set of circumstances brought us together. But for those circumstances, there's no way I would have reached out and called a psychic for help. That's never going to happen. But the circumstances that brought us together. So I'm not espousing that law enforcement, there's no substitute for investigation, right? I mean, you conduct a logical investigation, you use technology, you interview people, you look for physical evidence, the facts are what they are. But as a guy who's been around for 30 years investigating cases, I can tell you there's nothing more frustrating when you have run down all those avenues. You've pursued it to the very end, and this guy did this, but you can't prove it. That's very, very frustrating. And
absolutely.
Everybody's critical of law enforcement, and I get it. But people don't know all the facts, right? So why would I not have taken advantage of my friend here who has this disability?
John, do you work with any other agents, or is it exclusive partnership here?
I just work for Bob. I don't, honestly, Chris, I don't really have an interest in doing casework. It's not my thing. So I really feel like it's the personal connection between the two of us. So I've publicly said, like, this is not like me bringing a new part of my, ability out to the public to do this work, because I wouldn't work with families directly because they don't have the objectivity that Bob's going to have. So for me, it's like, it's what came through him.
This is incredible. It's a Hollywood movie here. I mean, seriously, the FBI agent and the psychic. I mean, I can see, a whole franchise here for you guys. So I hope you have good agents.
It's more than that. Chris, there are plenty of times, and one of them is cited in the book, where he and I are just having dinner one night, and he looks up at me and says, "Hey, you're going on a cruise next week." And I went, "What? What are you talking about?" He says, "No, you're going on a cruise. I see the ship." And I go, "Yeah, I think I would have tickets." And he says, "No, you're definitely going on a cruise ship." And he goes, "Oh no, wait, you're about to get pulled into a case on a cruise ship." I'm like,
Wow.
"Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about." And next week, guess what happens? I get pulled into a case.
John, does that ever, I don't know, freak you out is the right term, but I'll use freak you out, that when you see things like this, see the future for people, are you hesitant sometimes to tell them things that you see?
Well, this is my 40th year doing this. So I've got 4 decades. So I can literally go by the decades in 5-year increments and tell you how I learned how to say things and how not to say things. So, yeah, I'm not really freaked out by it. I am always looking at what's the ethical responsibility of how to deliver this information. Because if something negative is coming through, the reason why it's coming through is to help a person deal with it.
Sure.
Or stop it. Oftentimes there'll be negative things that are going to happen. I'm not going to see it at all. So I'm beyond the ego of the work. Like if you caught me in the first 5 years of doing this, definitely had more of an ego in my approach of delivery. Like, hey, look what I can do, kind of a thing. But within that same 5-year period, I lost an uncle and my mom died. And that literally was the catalytic moment for me to know, like, well, where is she? And will she see me when I get married? Will she see me when I have kids? And that desire became a driving force for how my kind of career shifted. It was just really, honestly, out of like a need to know that shaped that. So then my delivery changed because I now knew what intense grief felt like. And I communicated with people as if I was the one who was being read. And because I had really a strong sense of skepticism approaching the subject matter, I approached every single person like they were me. And even when people were like ardent believers, I would not let them talk. I would be like, no. Let me tell you. Because what I found is that as I was giving these strangers information about their family and they were validating it for me, it was as much for me hearing it as I was doing it.
You mentioned in Chasing Evil that the John Smith case isn't the only case. How many cases have you taken to John and worked together with him on?
Wow, I couldn't give an exact number, and
wow,
I will tell you this to John's credit, and again, we did not write this book with the intent we're trying to convince people of anything. These are just events that took place. This is not trying to make believers out of anybody. This is what took place. But to your question, Chris, there were plenty of times when I came to him on a case and he would say, "Yeah, I'm not getting anything." And that would be frustrating for me. I'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Like he could have easily made something up. But there were plenty of times when I went to him for help and he said, "Yeah, I'm not getting anything." Or he would get something that had nothing to have something to do with a different case. I'd be like, "I don't need help on that one. I need help on this one," But over the 30 years, a lot of cases.
As we start to wind down, what made you guys decide to write a book at this point?
So there was a moment when there was a boy that's unfortunately in the book, and something happened in that moment where I saw in Bob a need for validation that I never saw before. And I remember saying to him, if you want to go public with this right now, I'll support it. Like I'll do it. Whereas I was not open to that at all. I was pretty much like, please keep my name out of everything. Like I don't need to be connected to this. Like I'm being attacked over here as it is. Like I don't need that. And Bob said, no, I'm not ready. And I said, okay. And then as the John Smith story kind of made it to its iteration to where it wound up in the end of this book, Chasing Evil, we were having conversations. And again, it comes down to validation. And part of my work is always to get people to communicate, appreciate, and validate the people that are in our lives now. So a medium like me doesn't have to do it for you. Like every episode of Crossing Over, that show ended with that. And I kind of felt it was the right time for Bob. And arbitrarily, Bob just came up one day and said, like, I feel like we need to tell this story. I feel like the story needs to be told. I'm out of the FBI now. I feel like the story needs to be told. And I was like, okay, then let's tell that story. And then I think it took on a different kind of energy for me, where it wasn't me just, hey, I'm going to help Bob tell his story and I'm kind of a part of it. It was more like, wow, there's a journey of like personal discovery that's happening here while we're telling this story. There's some parallels here. Like I didn't realize I had some like daddy issues I was working through. And like by reflecting on this, this story and the 30 years of working with Bob, it was like I was seeking approval from my New York City cop dad. And by working with Bob, I was maybe getting it that way. So a lot came out in a personal way, I think, for both of us in doing this.
Bob, do you encourage other agents to explore using a psychic to help them? Not John necessarily, but other psychics per se.
I encourage investigators to be investigators,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whatever that means for them. I am not sitting here saying, hey, you should take, there's a funny old story in the FBI. It goes like this. There's a case where there's somebody who's disappeared, presumed dead. I think it's in Texas. And actually, one of my buddies is part of the story. And, we're busy working a million leads. And one day the supervisor comes to him and says, hey, there's 7 people here who have called in the hotline. They claim to be psychic and they have information about, this case. I want you to call them. So the agent goes, what do you mean call them? What are you, crazy? Call these people. They say, all right. So the agent calls. The person on the other end says, hello, who's this? And the agent hangs up and writes, not psychic, and goes, right? So like I said, I want to be careful how I answer this. John and I came together in a very unique way. I believe that the universe brought us together for whatever reason. This was our story, our journey. So I think it would be not prudent on my part to say, hey, FBI, you guys should start talking to psychics, because, I can only speak for John, right? I believe in John from my experience with him. Like any career, I'm sure there's good psychics, and I'm sure there's people who want to make believe they're psychic. And it's hard. We have limited resources. We have to do real work. So I can't answer that. I don't know that you should. Any investigation should start with, calling psychic hotlines.
Last few questions, John. You've done a lot of TV shows throughout the years, including my old friend Larry King.
Yes.
Great guy. Do you still? And I know you said you're touring, so you're used to being in the public eye. Obviously, you do this because you feel it's helping people. Do you enjoy kind of amazing and amusing fans and friends as well? Like,
no, I love teaching. I think my passion
Gotcha.
is to lead people better than I find them, and to educate them and say, hey, listen, in the 40 years of doing this, I found these tools to be really, really helpful. And sometimes I'll have a client that's been waiting years to get in front of me, and I have to say to them, I know you've been waiting a long time to be here, but you trust me enough to be here. And they're like, of course. I'm like, then I need you to trust me now when I tell you that you don't actually need me. What you actually need is this. And whatever this may be, it may be working with a grief therapist, it may be working with an astrologer. So it depends upon what that person needs. And I kind of put my work now there. Like what I'm doing is I created a platform called Evolve Plus TV, where I brought all of those things together, because I really, really feel like we're at a time collectively where people need tools to help them be more empowered and to transform. And I think I'm just like one little small part of that equation. So for the people that I can attract, I want to kind of shine a light in other areas.
It's amazing. Last question for you guys. Bob, you mentioned all the other cases that you've worked. You said it was too many to even mention. Is there another case that you worked with John that stands out for you besides the John Smith case?
There's a lot of them, but I think for me, the other one that stands out is the disappearance of a little 5-year-old boy. His name was Noah, and that's in the book. And John led me to where his body was at midnight on a particular night. And it was a very tragic case. And, anytime there's a case involving innocent children, it has a different context. So that case certainly stands out to me as one of many.
But I mean, it's as tragic as it is even worse when the family doesn't have a body and doesn't know for sure. So you're actually bringing some closure to the families that desperately need it.
That's very true.
Yeah. John, you've done so many readings. You said celebrities and helping the FBI. Is there a reading that stands out for you? Or I'm sure you have many that's one of your, I don't know if favorites is the word, but one of the ones that stands out as the most fantastic or amazing?
I really can't say I have a favorite. I have a favorite theme. I can give you a favorite theme. I like when I read for someone and information comes through, kind of like we detail in Chasing Evil with Bob when I first met him, where I actually give information to a person and they don't know what I'm talking about, and they have to pass it on to somebody else to validate. Because it kind of it's like bowling. You knock down a bunch of pins with one ball. So one message could affect change with a number of people, because it goes to the point of there's no way possible this person would know that if it didn't come from the person who had passed, and the person that he's reading didn't know it. So I can't be accused of reading their minds, or any of that. So that theme for me is kind of cool, because then it makes that person the messenger. And it's really not about any specific psychic or any medium. It's really about the message.
It's amazing. The book is Chasing Evil. Great talking with you guys. And like I said, this is a Hollywood movie here. I'm going to call some producers.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Great talking to you. Congratulations. Keep up the great work.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.